your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the demographics of the Western nations generally, of all the nations that have been subject to globalist enforced peasant mass migration from the third world, but particularly focusing on the United States. And again, given that the presidential and other elections, things like the various Senate seats and House seats in the House of Representatives, Federal House of Representatives and Senate are being also contested at the same time. Now, demographics sort of play a big part on how different racial groups vote. While the globalist propaganda machine says there's no such thing as race, they do treat race quite seriously when it comes to courting and looking for votes. So on their calculus, if they import lots of third world brown and black peasants, then they're going to vote globalist or Democrat, Democrats being the globalist, particularly the Globalist Party. The globalists have taken over, quite a lot of the Republican Party, but they haven't taken over all of it, but they have taken over the entirety of the Democrat Party machine. They own it. The globalists own it, lock, stock and barrel. And so whenever they import third world peasants that are there for the free stuff or coming to the West for the free stuff, in the case of the Hispanics and the Indians, which are two very big sources of migration, also chain migration, that is to bring out family members. There's not a Hispanic family in the US or an Indian family that doesn't want to bring out husbands and brides, doesn't want to bring out the entire village and third cousins and fifth cousins and so on. So chain migration is huge. If you shut down chain migration, if you shut down the ability to bring husbands and brides in from the village of your ancestors, there's a whole lot of people from the Middle East, India, Pakistan, the whole subcontinent, from South America just wouldn't bother coming. A large part of the reason they come is because they can bring the brides out later and the husbands and so on. and even with the Indians and again, folks from the Middle East, particularly the Arabic areas, even if they're Christians from the Arabic areas, they still will bring out husbands and brides from the village of their ancestors. And even if you go to their weddings, and I'm going through an interpreter here, but in the weddings they talk about you come from a good village that's got a history that goes back to the time of Allah and all this sort of stuff. So it's very much ingrained into their worldview. So if you cut that off, say no, if you come to the West, you can't marry and you can't bring your brides out, you can't bring your cousins out and all this sort of stuff, they wouldn't come, because that's the bigger part of why they come, as well as the free stuff, is because they can sort of recreate, if you like, their village, their peasant village when they come to the West. But it's coming to the demographics now. According to the statistics from and if you look at various groups, whether you look at the World Bank or you look at the United Nations figures, or indeed the US Bureau of Statistics, they all have different numbers on this. None of the numbers appear to line up, but they claim that around 73 to 75% of the US population is white. Now, on the face of it, you go, oh, wow, okay, well, gee, I wouldn't have thought it was that high. Now, if you look at the mass migration numbers over the last 20 years, and particularly if you add to that the illegal migrants that aren't really factored in, they're only guessed at. For example, they're supposed to be somewhere around 35 million, but in statistical terms, they're only including something like 11 million. So I think the numbers are way out there. But if you look at the numbers that have come in on the migrants that have come in over the time, and over that, say, the last 25 years, and you look at the white population, that's no way could the white population be in the 70%. It's impossible given those numbers. But if you actually pick through the statistics, they recount and double count or use a strange system where they'll say, okay, it's 73% or odd white people in the US, but then they include all Hispanics and Latinos in that. So suddenly Latinos become white when they want to jump up the numbers and gin up the numbers. They see, there's no great replacement. That's all lies by the far right. There's no great replacement. Look, 75% of the population is white. What's your problem? Gee whiz. But the reality is they've added about 20-odd% of the total population, which I think is a bit of an undercount as well. I think it's closer to 25, 26% in reality. But they're saying 20, 21% of the population is Hispanic. But in a few pages on in the statistical analysis or statistical data that they produce, they'll then break out and say that 21%, 22% or so on is Hispanic. So suddenly you take that away. Well, if 73% are white, which includes Hispanics, if you take away the 22% or 21%, and I'm just looking at a number here, 21%, it's up to as high as 23% in other accounts, but say 21. So 73% white, take out 21%, that means there's only 52% white is the population. And that I would consider the total population. So total population of the US is in reality, I think, 52% white. If you then factor in the 20-odd million to 25 million, depending on your numbers there, of illegals, many of whom have been through the back door being given the right to vote because they're issued with driver's licenses, I would argue illegally. Well, there's no argument it is illegal. They're illegal and the driver's license is thus illegal. And then through that driver's license, that's treated in some states as ID and proof of, or de facto proof of citizenship, so they have the right to vote. Now, if you look at the amount of those licenses that have been issued in the various states where they have permission to do that, you've got to assume that there's, at the very minimum, there's around half of the illegals in the US voting in some capacity. That may only be in state elections or in local city council type elections. But also many of those in federal elections. So I would argue in the overall total voter mass of people that the voting population or eligible to vote population has actually slipped below 50%. I would argue it's now below 50%. And if you look at then the rate of births in the United States and look at the ratio of white births to then non-white births are outnumbering white births by more than 2 to 1. So the demographics here are pretty clear. Now, the same is happening in other countries. Now, in Australia, there's the government claims that statistically that 68% of the population is white. Well, that's an absolute lie. That is a total lie. Whenever I go into downtown Sydney or Melbourne, for that matter, but Sydney. I never see more than 20%, whether it's in in public transport. This is whether it's in like on buses or in trains, because trains are quite a big part of moving people around in Sydney. It's got quite a good train network actually, and so I'm never in I'm mostly in a train carriage where I'm the only white person or one of one or two white people. And even in areas where in the CBD, areas where you think you'd see a lot of white people, the ratio of white people in the train carriage is never more than 20%, mostly lower than that. Now, if I go into the main, if you like, the plaza or the mall, the Galleria, as they sometimes call it in the US, in Sydney, where again, not only a few years ago, you would hardly ever see a non-white face, and even that was a tourist. And today, I can sit there for 10 minutes. This is in a busy, like a lunch hour, say, time when the place is full of people sort of bustling and hustling around everything. And I'm lucky to see more than a few white faces there. It's astonishing. Now, the same thing if I look at a video from or like some movie reel or just like a news reel or something from, say, the 1970s and into the 1980s, even into the early 1990s. You'd be lucky to, like, say, in one of the main shopping strips in downtown Sydney, you'd be lucky to see any non-white people in that. The same would be in, say, 1960s or 1970s Britain, in London. You'd be lucky to see any non-white faces. And you look at that same street today on a newsreel, then the exact reverse is the case. You're lucky to see any white faces. They're all brown and black faces. So clearly, this is no illusion. This is just hard fact that white people are being replaced at a much faster rate than the globalist controlled Western governments want to let on. They want to make there's not that much of it. No, it's not really happening. And if you say it's happening, it's because you're a damn fascist Nazi, Hitler bigot, xenophobe, Nazi, da da da. So they straight away come back and scream Nazi at you. But the reality, your lying eyes aren't lying. This is what's happening. So I would argue in Australia that the white population has fallen below 50%. If the two most populous cities in Australia that have more than a third of the total population of the nation, then and if white people are an absolute and clear and obvious minority, another example, I was looking at a regional small city that was, I don't know, 100 miles or so from downtown Sydney, and I was in the train station there not long ago, and the last time I was in that train station would have been 5 years ago, I guess, and I hardly saw any brown people. It was all white people. It was very clearly a white sort of place. And then I was there a few days ago. White people wouldn't even be 50% of the train commuters now. That's how quickly it's changed. So mass migration on a mass scale forced on the population without consent. And that's irritating. If you want to do it with your consent. It's supposed to be a fucking democracy where we get to choose and we're asked to vote on it. Not asked to vote, it's been imposed and brutally imposed. And if you say anything about it, they'll call you a Nazi. Coming back now to the demographics, now looking through the various sort of classes of people, none of the mass migrants come from other Western values type countries. Now the migration that came to, say, the United States, as the United States was developing, or Australia for that matter, Canada, the sort of migration was mainly, with some exceptions, but mainly it was Christian, pretty much all white or Mediterranean swarthy, but white, and from countries that had not the same but similar enough. The integration rate was pretty reasonable. I guess you'd have things like, say, Irish Catholics coming to a 100% Protestant type area, and there was some friction there, and or the Italians coming, and again the Catholic thing, say the Russian Jews coming, East European Russian Jews coming in the 1880s, 1890s. This wasn't an absolutely seamless state. They walked off the boat and that's not. But there were language issues. During the Italian Civil War, for example, quite a lot of Italians came to the US. Now, because of the suddenness of what happened, their English maybe wasn't that good. A lot of them were rural farmers. They weren't all sort of industrialists or something like that. And so there was an integration period, but when they came for the freedoms. They came for not every single one of them, but they came for what the US had to offer, and the ability of a new start, a new society where you could become American. And this was something that got me the first time, certainly as a young man, I went to the United States. I met migrants from, say, South America, but they were somewhat sophisticated, and their intention for themselves and certainly their children, they wanted to be American. I want to be a good American, and the American experience, the American culture, this sort of thing. Now that even within 10 years, so say from the early 1980s into the early mid 1990s, there was a complete change where people weren't going, I'm not coming to be an American, fuck America, I'm here for the free stuff. I'm here so I can bring out my whole village from some rural shithole somewhere. That completely different. Suddenly it went from everybody wanting to be an American and be part of the American experience to people just again freeloading and wanting the free stuff. And that happened within 10 years. I thought, wow, even back then, and I was still a young man, it surprised me at how quickly that shift occurred. Coming to the election or electoral implications then, the way, this is a tendency, not everyone's the same for goodness sakes, but the way white people in the majority tend to vote, not always, but tend to vote, or even if it's not 100% this way, it's more so than any of the other groups, they'll vote for policies. And are the policies good for the economy? Will it help my kids get a good education? Will it improve my life? Will my job opportunities be better? Will the economy be doing well and produce and create well-paid jobs? Will the cost of living be, those types of things? And those are the priorities. And now you can have different, the blue-haired sort of lesbian college kids, they won't vote that way because they can't comprehend anything outside. Well, I want to know there's going to be lots of policies for green-haired trans people or something. So they'll see it from a very different perspective. But as they get older, they'll change. I went through a period in my youth of communist sympathies, nothing like you see today, but certainly it was. I wouldn't even call it by today's standards. It was hardly radical. So I was middle of the road. But nonetheless, I went through my communist sympathies period. But as I started to get older and had to take responsibility and all that sort of thing, and to fit in, I had to my views sort of altered, not in a sudden sort of hit, but through sort of massaging more in the direction again of taking responsibility and things like that. Now, each migration group that's coming into the West, they're not other Western white people. So they're not thinking as Western white people do. They don't have that tradition of democracy and power sharing and representative government, rule of law, due legal process, independent courts, independent public service. They don't have any of those traditions and don't understand them. I think it's rather strange. Even talking to East Europeans, so if you have the power to do what you want to do, why wouldn't you do it? Why would you allow that power to be diluted with an assumed responsibility for the community at large? That's insane. You're stupid. If you've got the power, use it. And if you need to kill other people, kill them. I mean, they're very different view to well, at least what used to be the case in the West. So none of the traditions that uphold the social structure that the West has developed over many hundreds, indeed thousands of years, going back to the Greek and the Romans and all that sort of stuff. The people that are coming in now don't give a shit about any of that. It's all irrelevant. Hey, give me the free stuff. Give me the free stuff. Give me some more free stuff, and then more. So they've got no concept of economics or just economic sustainability or none of that. They just don't comprehend it, and they'll take a different view of if the economy gets tough and you've got two generations living in the same house, how do you survive tougher economic circumstances? Well, you just have three generations living in the same house. And in fact, it's tougher than 4 generations, 5 generations, which is how they have it in places like India and so on, and South America. You just add another generation into your household, and then you've kind of amortized the additional cost of living over more people, more income earners, and so on. But where does each group vote? Once you move away from white people, say looking at Republicans, and I'll use that as an example, and it's a stark example at the moment because Trump is an outsider and he represents the interests of Americans, not the freeloaders that are coming in, not the globalists, not the mass migrant wave. He represents Americans, American-born Americans, or anybody who wants to be part of the American, the American culture. There are people who still, but not very many of them now, but there are still people who come in who want to be real Americans and be part of the American, to contribute and to find the cure for cancer and all that sort of thing. There's still those people out there, just not very many of them. The vast majority that are coming in are just freeloaders, again, that want to bring out their whole peasant village into America. And they have no ambition beyond that, other than tax avoidance, maybe. But if you have a look at each group, the Indians, the Hispanics, the Latinos, the blacks, In fact, any Pacific Islanders, you look at any group that's coming into the US, as in the mass migrate Africans, you look at any group coming in, and they are all by far and away globalist, pro-globalist voters. Why are they pro-globalist voters? Well, again, for the same stuff. They're there for the free stuff. They're freeloaders. They're not people who are coming for the American experience. Fuck the American experience. I'm here for the free stuff. And again, to bring out their whole village, their relatives, their second cousins and third cousins and so on and so forth. That's what they're there for. And they're not there for anything to do with America and if you talk about free speech or independent courts, I mean, well, who gives a fuck about that? Just give me some free stuff. So all the things that underpin a successful, well-organized, well-run society, all those things, these freeloaders coming in, they don't give a stuff about that. They don't think about it. They've got no experience with it. They can't relate to it. They don't see how the wealth that they're coming to parasite off is created by those very organizational structures that the West has built up. You take those organizational structures away, such as independent courts and free speech, rule of law, you take that away, then all the wealth, all the structure that creates the wealth is going to disappear as well. In fact, it's already disappearing. Well, I thought it's going to disappear. It's already disappearing. So if you look at all these groups coming in, then the mass migrant groups coming in, they between, say, 70 and 90% of all the voters in those groups support the globalist parties, because the globalist parties support mass migration, which means they can bring out their third cousins and support the free hotels for illegal aliens, and support spurious super low bar asylum claims that aren't asylum claims, they're just bullshit parasite claims. So the globalists support all of that, because the globalists support mass movement of surplus populations into the West. And therefore, these folks will vote for that because it satisfies their immediate requirements. Reiterating, give me the free stuff. Let me bring out my entire third cousin family into the US, and the globalists support that because they support mass migration. So if you look at that in just from a numerical point of view, the Democrats or the globalists have all those groups pretty much sewn up, and only the white people are holding out to vote for non-globalist policy, which is why the globalists hate the white people so much. That's why the globalists are forever talking about Nazis and white supremacy and neo-Nazis and fascists and so on. What they're really saying is those folks won't vote for us, and so we're going to demonize the shit out of them. That's what's happening there. But coming back to this thing that if, let's suppose, for example, that the globalists rigged the election, which they're desperately trying to do, rig the election so that their stooge candidate, Kamala Harris, gets up as president. And they're also managed to rig the elections, which I've no doubt they're going to do, for the House of Representatives and the Senate in the United States. So they control, House and Senate and the Office of Presidency. Then the globalists are fully in control, and all the people involved would just sign whatever the globalists put in front. Sign this, do that, and the globalists would just be able to issue their orders and have them followed instantly. Then all the illegals currently in the US will be given citizenship and the right to vote. So that's at least. At least 30 million people will suddenly be legitimate citizens on the electoral roll. Probably closer to 40 million, I would think, in total. So that alone would tip the balance. So white people would be, say, 44% of the total. Then you look at mass migration, illegal and otherwise, continuing. Then within another 10 years, white people will be less. I would think close, somewhere around 35 to maybe 37% of the total population of the US and elsewhere, because the globalists will demand all white Western countries behave the same way, Australia, Canada, and so on. And it'll just be masses of blacks and Latinos and Indians coming in, all of whom will vote for more of the globalist insanity. So the globalists won't need to do anything. They'll just need to sit back and there'll be a pretend non-democracy, non-voting where the citizens aren't choosing their government, they're choosing free stuff, and they'll never again will Republicans win. And I think that's where we're at now. Let's look at the other side of this, where if Trump wins, and we can only hope and pray that he does, and he follows through on his policy claims and his claims that he makes in his rallies and speeches and so on, and that through varying means, and I think self-deportation as much as eviction, but say the 35, 40 million, maybe not all of them, are evicted. Maybe some of them now are PhDs, genuine PhDs. Maybe they could be allowed to stay. If they're genuine American citizens, they're making genuine contributions and that sort of thing, and they're delivering a surplus to the exchequer, then to the Treasury. Why maybe they should stay, or something can be discussed along those lines. But let's assume that the 35 plus million are removed from the United States. Illegal migration stops entirely, and mass migration is skilled migration only. Skilled migration and high bar skilled migration, not I'm seeing in Australia where some African chick types at 10 words a minute or some bullshit, and because she's got a 6-week secretarial certificate course out of somewhere, Kinshasa or somewhere, that she's given a skilled migration visa. I mean, what a joke. That is going on, that sort of stuff. So if Trump wins and the migration situation is like really clamped down, no more illegal and high bar skilled migration and eviction or repatriation of the illegals, then the pendulum will swing back the other way. Then suddenly white people will be over 60% of the voters again, and that relativity would be maintained at least for 4 to 8 years thereafter, and that would make a huge difference, and would ensure that representative government of the people, by the people, for the people was then reinstated. And the only hope we've got of that is if Donald Trump wins. If he loses, then I think it's game over. Or if they rig the election, which is something, again, that when they did that in 2020, they tried to rig it even in 2016. They just didn't gin up enough numbers to do it. So that's my view on things. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.